Hey guys, welcome back to the Unbreakable Book Club, where we are going through books that will help strengthen us, our families, and our community as a whole. In this series, we are currently looking at the book PowerNomics by Dr. Claude Anderson. In this video, we're going to be going over chapter 2. Before we get started, I wanted to invite you to the actual Unbreakable community, where we are not only going over these books, but we are also having discussions and sharing ideas of how to actually implement these strategies inside of our own communities. So you can join the community down below. So in chapter 2 of the book, Dr. Claude Anderson talks about the fact that the racial gap isn't accidental. It was actually engineered to be that way. And a lot of times you hear about you've heard people say that black people can't be racist, and the view that I have of that is what they're saying is black people don't own the infrastructure to allow us to hold back another race. So when Dr. Claude Anderson talks about racism, what he's talking about is literally different ethnic groups racing. So when you think about that, it says that we don't have the infrastructure to make it harder for other people to win the race. And that's what he means by racism. Like, I by no means don't mean that if a black person uses racial slurs and is mean to somebody else, that is not, a form of racism. If you're a black person that, has a position in a company where you are actually tied to the hiring and firing of our people as well as other people, and you purposely choose not to help other, not to hire other people of ethnic groups, that's not prejudice and that's not being racist. But the way Dr. Claude Anderson describes it in his book, he's saying that we don't own enough infrastructure to actually hold an entire other community from moving forward. And I know the way I said that sounds like the next step is going to be, yeah, we can do that. But what he's actually going for in here is saying that we actually need those infrastructures. We actually need those institutions, not to hold other people back, but the fact that we don't have the ownership of any institutions where we actually have the ability to be racist is also why we are failing in the wealth gap. And he didn't say it like that, but that's also how I took it. This is a book club, and we're here to discuss the book. So I'm not telling you literally what Dr. Claude Anderson is saying. I am going over my thoughts on the book and how it relates to how we can move forward as a culture. So the first part is the foundation of wealth is ownership, and wealth does not equal income. And a big one that this hits for me on is often whenever you hear people talk about money in the black community, we talk about our buying power. As I film this video, we are currently boycotting Target, with our dollars, and it is hurting them. There's been headlines about it's hurting them, but when you think about what's actually happening with those dollars, we just decided to give it to the Bezos or the Walton family, meaning Amazon or Walmart is now getting the money that we were spending with Target. So that's why he was saying that wealth is actual ownership, because when we pulled our money away from Target, we didn't have a large black-owned institution, multi-billion-dollar international conglomerate that we could put that money in, because we don't own anything on that level. And even on a smaller scale, and not saying that we should just go out there and try to, build a bunch of retail outlets that could rival Target, but it's also saying that there was nowhere else to go but to the Bezos or Amazon family for those same needs that we were initially getting from Target. And that's why he was saying that wealth is not just income, it's actually what you own, it is not what you earn. That ownership, gap is going to continue to widen as we don't actually have the businesses in our communities, these schools, health facilities, and all of that we actually own, as more and more other groups own those businesses in our communities. They own the real estate, they own the gas station, they own the stores, they own everything that we're wearing. All we have is buying power, and that's just income. All we can do is get money and give it to another community and another ethnic group, and we have to get to a point to where it's okay to give your money to another ethnic group, because we can't own and sell everything, but at some point we have to start owning enough businesses and industries to where we not only become the businesses that we go to for those, but we also start to become the business owners that other people are coming to for those products. So if you're thinking about, even on entertainment, right? The whole nation, as I'm filming this video, right? I mean, the whole world, as I'm filming this video, Kendrick Lamar has been on this run, and like today, as there's a video of him in Germany, and it's just rocking. We don't own any other record labels though, so it's still just income generating. Yes, he has his own record label, but the distribution often goes to these other big companies, who's able to be put out, the radio, the streaming companies. As it gets bigger and bigger, we start to lose control of what the message that we want to put out. And the reason why Kendrick Lamar is being received so well right now is because he's doing it in a way that actually promotes the culture in a positive light, when for the past 20 or 30 years other communities have owned the rights to how we were going to appear and what we were going to enjoy. And if you don't think that's true, if tomorrow all of the radio stations just decided, we're not going to play any kind of gangster rap anymore, if all the streaming companies said we're not going to play any gangster rap anymore, within a year or two, we wouldn't like gangster rap anymore, because they literally get to decide. Other cultures literally get to decide who our tastemakers are. And you can say all you want that is the music that you want, that is the movies that you want. But in reality, we want to hear black people and see black people in film, and the people involved are just saying, okay, well, here's the representation of you all that we're going to get. And for a very long time, we're only getting one-dimensional views of us, and it's often the ratchet view. And yes, sometimes that's fun. Yes, we have that in our community, but we are a multi-dimensional community. Yet our music only shows us in one particular light. And it's by design. Like, long as they keep us happy and dancing and doing all these things in the way that they want to see us, we start to continue to see ourselves that way. And we think that is the actual reality. And that's what we accept, and that's what we fight for, and that's what we stick to. And they're literally engineering that wealth gap and making us willing participants in that. And again, with that willing participants portion, I think it was Lecrae. It was either Lecrae or LaRussell. I saw a tweet a while ago where it said that a radio station wasn't going to play his music because he had, spoken about Pakistan and Israel and all that, and they said, we can't allow you to speak on those topics, so we can't play it. But the same radio station was later on playing music about us killing each other. So us killing each other is music we're allowed to sing about, but singing about Israel and Pakistan killing each other is off limits. And that's because we are not in control of our image or our media or what we choose to put out in the world. So that legacy of extraction and not investment, meaning that the nation is not investing in our community, but trying to figure out how they can extract as much wealth from us as possible. And again, on the modern time, I'm going to go back, but on the modern time, that is us having that pride and saying that it's our dollars. We have our $1 trillion consumers But that's still extraction. That's still us saying we're going to go work for somebody that's not us, not our institutions, and then they're going to extract our income and send it to another community. But that's present day. Going all the way back again to slavery, it's been happening. If you check out the book that we're going to be discussing later, but if you decide to go ahead and read it, How Nations Fail, the basic premise of the book is the way that nations fail is the nation puts in policies where they just extract wealth, but they don't actually invest in the people of those communities. And when you look around the world, they're what they've shown is countries that actually invest in the people of that country are prosperous, and countries where the oligarchs of the country are just trying to make as much money as they can without actually investing in the people are actually the poor countries in the world. And if you think about the black community as a nation within the American nation, you will see that they have figured out ways to invest through like the H-1B visas in the Arabic and Asian communities that come over. Those people come over, they get these resources. They were getting loans to often be in our community. So the H-1B visas allowed them to make money in tech, make money in industry. You know, they were highly skilled. We were taking the skilled labor from those other communities, from those other countries, which again, those H-1B visas were them taking the smart people from other countries and putting them ahead of the smart black people that they already had here in the nation, and using that as a part of the DEI that they're now against. But still, that diversity, equity, and inclusion, once we fought for it and said that we wanted people of color, meaning us, to have a seat at the table, they said, bet. And it became black and brown. And they started to put everybody else ahead of us through the programs that we fought for. And that was part of, that is what happened after we demolished Jim Crow. But going back to slavery, the entire institution of slavery was literally these Europeans going to South America and North America, and it was British in North America and the Spanish in South America, going to those nations and saying basically we are going to force these the indigenous population to just work for us as slave, and we're going to extract all of the wealth, and we're not going to invest in the indigenous population. Spain succeeded in pulling it off in South America. The British could not do it with the Native Americans here in America. So after they couldn't do it with the Native Americans, because the Native Americans knew the land and would just dip on them, they tried to bring over the Irish and some of the actual British prisoners. And what happened then was they still couldn't extract it, because when you bring the Irish over and try to force them to be slaves, well, eventually they just changed their accent and decided to tell you that they're British. So they couldn't keep control of that population. So they had to find another population to extract. And that's how they got the transatlantic slave trade. When you look at our skin, we can't change our accent and just tell you that we're white and British like you are. And then we weren't from over here. So and when people talk about what they would have did and how they would have did it back in the day, like look outside and just imagine not knowing where anything is in America, not knowing who the enemy is, and just saying you're gonna walk away. Like that's how they controlled us, and that's where that extraction came from. And it was like, you're gonna work for free and we're gonna make all of the money. We're not gonna invest in your community. That went through slavery, that went through Jim Crow. And then even on redlining, once they started just drawing the communities and deciding where we're going to live, and basically ensuring that we didn't have the institutions and infrastructure to succeed. And even Asians have created TikToks and whatnot and saying that they were able to get loans, and the loans from the Asians couldn't get the loans for businesses to open up in white communities, but they also didn't want us to have strength to get bank loans to open up those businesses in our own communities. So their solution was to allow the Asian and Arabic community to get business loans to open businesses in the black communities. So that's why they own everything in our communities. It's not exploitative on their part, but it did kind of, it comes off being exploitative in the end, because they own all the institutions in our neighborhoods. But again, it was by design, by people that did not want us to succeed, but wanted to put other people ahead of us, just to preserve the history of what they had started in this country, which was blacks at the bottom and whites on top. And they didn't mind if there were shades of brown in between that, long as we were still at the very bottom. And then today, again, we get the predatory lending and the discriminatory zoning, where we end up in places, and strategically placing those places where it's hard for us to succeed and grow. So no wealth without community or an economic structure is the next thing that he talks about in chapter 2 of this book. And it's basically saying that we need more black-owned businesses, not just supporting them, but as I said in chapter 1 of this series, we need black-owned businesses that actually are the vendors for other black-owned businesses. So again, going back to that ownership and not just the buying power, where we're going out and working for Fortune 500 companies and using the money that we make from them on our paychecks to just go and support the few black-owned businesses. It's actually a concerted effort to create black businesses in multiple industries that support those other black businesses. Those black-owned farms is another one he brought up. And I can't remember, I brought it up in the chapter 1 video on that. But even the black-owned farms. So a lot of times when you're in the, as they call it, the hood, we've heard people talk about how they're food deserts, how it's no way to actually get fresh food. You go to like the suburbs, or you go to richer neighborhoods, and they have great grocery stores, some of the large grocery chains that have fresh food. They have some of the Whole Foods, Trader Joe's, and Sprouts. Some places where you can get the really good organic food. And then when you get to the hood, we don't really have the best grocery stores. We don't have the expensive organic options. But when you have black-owned farms, we can start having the ability to create our own farmers markets. And again, this is my interpretations of solutions that we can have now. But if you go to basically, especially some of the hoods in the South, I'm from Texas, so this might not work in New York where everything is street level, but there's a creative way to still do it out there. But here in Houston, where I'm located, you can look at some of the low-income black communities, and there are plots of land that are just empty. And especially in Houston, there's not a lot of zoning laws that prohibit having a business in the same area as a neighborhood, which to me says we could actually have farmers markets. And if you want to put one even closer, you don't even have to have a huge farm to help us have this farmers market. I can tell you right now that I suck at trying to start it, but I only went for about a month. But my brother and his wife actually have the above ground gardens. And they've just been doing it for a couple of months, but they've been successful, and they're actually growing, vegetables and herbs and spices in their backyard. So if you think about a community, and I'm gonna call out Third Ward here in Houston, where my church is, the people who actually have backyards could do what my brother is doing at his house and actually grow organic produce in their backyard. And there's also lots for sale, like land lots that don't have a house on them. Those lots could be purchased by somebody else, where a farmer's market, even temporary, doesn't have to be a strong structure. It could be, similar to the structure they have when they just throw up the flea markets or the fireworks stands, where basically a temporary structure with some tables, And people from the neighborhood could literally grow produce in their own backyard, show up to this empty lot that has a tent over it, and other people from the community could come and literally buy produce from other members of the community. And that's how we start to feed ourselves. This one became a big one, an idea, and this is why I ended up trying to garden in the first place. Back in May, it's currently July of 2025 when I'm making this video. We're having a tariff war with China, and they were saying that there weren't the ports in LA were starting to be empty because we might possibly be running out of food. So this is a way that we ensure that we actually can feed our own community if the food supply is ever purposely cut off from all of America or cut off from us. We know how to feed our own community. Black-owned schools. I made a post on Facebook a while ago that wasn't received well, but I still believe that it's a good idea. But our governor had made a proposal, and I don't know if it's so much chaos has happened, but basically in that proposal, it was said that basically they've been trying to dismantle public schools, and they were going to give this funding to like charter schools and public schools, basically this voucher program. And for the longest, you hear most of us that are anti voucher program, like saying that blacks need the public schools. But when I saw this, I saw an opportunity to flip that on its head. And you can go and Google micro schools right now. There are 95,000 micro schools in America, many of them that were started during the pandemic. So they take about $100,000 to start. But basically, these micro schools are schools with 20 to 30 kids only, and they're in small spaces. So like a storefront, inside of small churches. They could actually be inside of a church, because on my Facebook post, I said that if Greg Abbott is going to give $10,000 per student to a private school, to anybody that's in the private school, why doesn't every black church in Texas at least start a private school? And Greg Abbott would literally be giving $10,000 to each student that goes to the camp, goes to regular school that's at that church. So if you think about all the kids that are in Sunday school at your church, if they were actually going to to a private school that used those exact same Sunday school classrooms as actual school classrooms throughout the week, you now have a government funded private school that becomes black owned. And again, I know that if it starts to lose that ownership if we're getting the money from the school, from the state, but it becomes a start, and it becomes that infrastructure of how we can start to have these schools that are black owned, even if they're funded by the government, because all of them are going to, even white private schools are going to be eligible to get this funding from the government, as well as white owned. I'm not going to say white owned or other culture owned private and charter schools are going to be able to get this funding. We should be going out there and getting the funding as well. Instead of what we typically do is, once this is coming, we don't see the opportunity, we just see the threat, and we'll go out and march and protest and try to stop the voucher program from happening, instead of having another team that's thinking about, okay, if we don't stop the voucher program from happening, how do we make sure that we benefit from the voucher program? And that was my view when I was talking about what we could possibly do. And again, you can go and look up micro schools and see that it is something that can be done, especially with where we are now with having different online curriculum. Again, my vision was, there's another software company out there called Mia Academy, where they have an entire online infrastructure that's like $40 a month per kid, and I think $1,000 for the year. So when you're doing that math on what I just said for the church already has this building. The church could pay $1,000 to Mia Academy to have this curriculum. Put the curriculum, you have the kid access it on a Chromebook. That could be $250. You're like $1,250 in on this student that the government is going to give you $4,000 to $10,000 for, and the rest of that money can be used to actually pay the teachers from your congregation to actually teach the kids. And by teach the kids, I mean it's almost homeschooling. There's an online curriculum where they're following the online curriculum, and you can actually have teachers in there to actually facilitate and just making sure the kids are doing the work and helping the kids when they get stuck on what the online curriculum is doing. And again, that's for me saying here's the baby step to getting to the point to where we own, completely own Black-owned schools where no government funding is needed. And we start to write our own curriculum, and eventually somebody Black will come up with the equivalent of the Media Academy, and that can be the things that all the Black schools start to use. But what I just said was just the start. All right, so the next portion that he was going over in that book, again, was the danger of relying on outsiders. And I've hinted that in the school portion where I was like, Media Academy and the school and funding from the government. The problem with that is, as we saw with DEI, is as the politics of the nation change, our support changes. And when the hugest danger in relying on others is what we've seen right now with DEI. DEI and affirmative action were things that were designed to help the Black community get back, get stronger based on all the extractive policies that were put in place due to slavery, Jim Crow, and redlining. But even with that, what happened was once they put DEI and affirmative action in place, a lot of the support came for it because of the fact that much of the wealth in this country was owned and controlled by white men. So if you ever heard the term the Good Old Boys Club, that's what affirmative action and DEI were put in place to combat. Well, the biggest recipients of affirmative action and DEI are white women. That is a statistical truth. And when you think about it, and you think about the idea that Dr. Claude Anderson says that racism is literally a race of different cultures and ethnicities, if you are the Good Old Boys Club and you're white men and you're now realizing that you have to share the wealth with other people that aren't white men, who would you want these DEI and affirmative programs to actually benefit the most? As much as they come out there and say that they're anti-feminist, their moms, daughters, wives, and sisters are all white women, which are also the biggest beneficiaries of DEI and the affirmative action that we fought to have instituted. So when you think about that, the policies that we fought and marched for are still going to their houses because the white man is now sharing that wealth with his wife, daughter, mother, and sister, who are benefiting from the policies that we put forth. And now that they're dismantling that, they got everybody to fight to dismantle it. And basically, they knew already that we weren't the beneficiaries of affirmative action, but the way they pushed it was that it was going to hurt us. But also with the rise of the rail pill movement and the anger towards the Me Too movement, they knew that the biggest beneficiaries were white women. And they was like, you know what, let's just pull it up for everybody. Because that view with if you look on there, I think they call them trad wives or something, they actually want to go back to the 50s. And it's not just us. They actually want to get to a place where the only people making in this country were white men, and they want their women, mothers, daughters, and sisters, and wives back in the house barefoot in the kitchen. So that is another reason why they're pulling this DEI away. And that, what he's getting at is that true development comes from within. And as much as, affirmative action and DEI programs were needed, and they did benefit some people where we got to be put in different places, the problem was it was a crutch. And the thing that you're supposed to do with a crutch is use the crutch until you healed and just throw it away. So the proper usage of DEI after desegregation would have been that first decade or so, figuring out, how to move, how to use the DEI and affirmative action to get to places that we needed to be, to get our money up so that we can start to use our money to build the infrastructure. That way, once those crutches were pulled away from us, we wouldn't even notice it. The issue right now is those programs have been removed, but we also were the biggest beneficiaries of it, but we're still kind of in that same place. So that relying on outsiders, again, it's just that outside control. They get to decide the direction that you're going to go. And if it's not our vision, if it's not in our best interest, if they're in control, it's still their money, their power, and it's just our opportunities to be at their table. And again, whenever the politics or what they want, the people that have the outside control, what happens is when they change, we lose them. And that when politics change, we lose it. And that's literally what happened with Target and why there's the boycott. Target was all on board for helping us until there was a regime change. And all of a sudden it was like, okay, we don't need DEI anymore. Which means they never really supported us in the first place. It just worked for extracting money from us. So the next time something like that comes around, because eventually there will be another group that realizes they should help us, take the help, but take it and know that we're just on crutches. And the purpose of these crutches are just for us to get strong enough to either push the crutches away, or when the crutches are pulled away, we're just looking at everybody like, all right, we're good. We don't even need the crutches, but now that if y'all are taking them, we're still okay without them. Those institutions that we need for building that economic power, as we've said before, it starts with the banks. And banks are huge infrastructures. So even for that, I'm not gonna say start with the banks, but we banks are one of them that he's spoken of. If you'll catch me, I'm looking over. I got a PowerPoint that I created from my notes. So banks are a big one that he talks about, and the banks come through lending. But even on that, we can start even smaller through networking and getting jobs in our own communities. Mortgage lenders, if more Black people just get on the lending side of things and start networking with us, we now have that foot in the door. So if you have a Black mortgage lender, he's more inclined to work with the community to say, okay, look, the company that I work for can't approve you like this, but I want what's best for my community. So here's what we're gonna do to get you right. So it's not just you're not good for us, no rejection email. It's okay, you're not good for us right now, but I'm gonna take care of my people. Here's how we're gonna get you straightened up. And we have our own networks that I'm gonna talk about when I get to the churches. When we have our own networks, it's easier to do that. So if you're thinking about that mortgage lender saying you're not a good fit, here's somebody that I know that can help you repair your credit so you can come back and be a good person that my company, a good person on paper that my company will approve. And I'm going to skip down to the churches on that portion because a big part of what I think is necessary with our churches is to have the old school bring a business card networking events. We have these large churches now where a lot of time you don't even realize that your pew partner is somebody that can either that could basically get you to the next step of what you want in life. And I had this thought a while ago, and then for me it became confirmation when I heard the guys over at Earn Your Leisure. I think it was Troy. The church he goes to, he just happened to go to the church with somebody that was able to put them on with Revolt TV. And one of the things that I guess when I was learning about entrepreneurship, I would get frustrated was, you'd have these people that's, these kids and say that, they started their web design business by just doing some free work for some of their dad's friends. And when I read that at the time, I was like, well, That's a cheat that I wouldn't have access to because my mom works for a corporation. My dad's blue collar. He works for another corporation, and there was no opportunity to say just reach out to your mom's friends. But later on in life, I found out that there were multiple people at our church that owned businesses that my mom, kicked it with. But because she didn't have a business and because we didn't talk about those kind of things, I didn't know, right? I never knew that I could say, Mom, is there any of the people at church that I could do a free website for? Because we weren't talking about those things. As we talk about, the women that, black women having problems with birth and the mortality rates of black women in black hospitals, and we need more black doctors. Again, I go to a large mega church in Houston, black church in Houston, and when we found our doctor to deliver our babies, the OBGYN, she actually went to our church. And when we're talking about these problems with needing more black OBGYNs, and we just happen to have one at our church. But again, that problem could be solved if you imagine that all of her patients were members of our church. And if that goes around the world or the nation, and you're thinking about the fact that if that's a problem, it can be literally solved if there were OBGYNs at most of these large mega churches. And everybody that from that community and that congregation were going to the black OBGYNs that were a part of the community. That part of that problem could be solved. Did a website for a guy that was the home inspection. At the same time that I was doing his website, it was in the news that these home inspectors were undervaluing black-owned homes. So again, our first thought is always to go out and protest the racism when the problem could actually be solved by saying, okay, we need to figure out how we can get more black home inspectors. Instead of trying to convince other cultures to value us more, we just need black home inspectors to go into black homes and inspect those homes and give them the proper value instead of other cultures degrading it just by the fact that they saw a black picture in the house. And again, on here, banks, I just kind of went over it. I don't know if we actually need full hospitals. So a lot of these are institutions, but you can start smaller with owning you don't have to have the medical center, should I say, in Houston, be black owned to have a black owned medical practice at the front of the neighborhood, a black owned urgent care. So that's where you start to start small. So you start with just making sure that we have more black doctors and nurses that are matriculating through the university, despite social media telling all black people that they should give up on college. We need more black doctors and nurses because you can't have a black-owned hospital without black-owned doctors and nurses. And you can't have black-owned doctors and nurses if every other social media guru is telling black kids don't go to college. I went over to schools. We need media, and we do have some political organizations, but a lot of our political organizations are still broke. And it's basically grassroots, sweat equity, relying on sharing things on social media. But we have to get to the point to where we have black-owned lobbyists. And I mean that on both sides. I'm going to keep bringing up this other community. The Jewish community literally has a liberal lobby and a conservative lobby. They are buying the popular politicians on both sides of the aisle. We have to get to that point as well. Regardless of how you feel about the Republican Party, regardless of how you feel about MAGA, they are going to win some races. I'm not saying you need to go out and vote for them, but I am saying, based on what I read from Dr. Claude Anderson, at some point we need to buy politicians on both sides, because I've said throughout this whole time, they are beholden to the people that put them in power financially before they are beholden to the people that put them in power with their votes, which means that at some point you have to buy politicians here in America if you want what's best for your community. We can call it support politicians, but it's still buying those politicians. And again, I'm going back to the Target boycott, which I am supporting on a community level, and I'm happy my wife has cut her addiction to just stopping by Target and getting stuff. But that is a reaction to something they did, which means that if they ever cave or fix it, we're going to lose that momentum because it's a reactionary and it doesn't have. And I'm not saying Pastor Bryant doesn't have a long 10-year vision for the boycott, but I'm saying from what Dr. Claude Anderson said in the book that we need to have 10 to 50-year goals. Other populations have those 10 to 50-year goals. The reason why we're fighting with China right now is because they had a 300-year plan for what they were going to do. I forgot it was called the Century of Shame or something. But whatever it was, the Chinese got hooked on opium across the entire nation, and the nation fell. So if you understand, China is thousands of years old empire that has been in power and was mighty up until that Century of Shame where the entire country got hooked on opium. They tried to fix that with communism. And it's not an anti-communism propaganda point, because when I actually looked into it, I was like, dang, that sucks. They were actually trying to do a good thing. But what happened with them trying to, get over what happened with the opium crisis and, with communism, they just went too fast. And the solutions they put in place actually broke the country down further. So they just continue to learn and iterate from those problems, and that is how they decided, we're going to be the low-cost manufacturers for the whole world. And we always like, man, China makes these cheap products, we're going to go over there. But what they were doing was building up a skill set for their entire nation. So it went from them making the cheap stuff to now they make everything. And there are videos of tech CEOs actually saying, we don't have anybody in America that can do what the Chinese can do from a manufacturing standpoint. That's when you have long-term goals for your entire culture. That's not just based on you trying to get as much money for your family and your grandchildren as possible. So in that, he was saying we have to identify those core needs, which are land, food, education, and businesses. That is how you protect your community forever. You have to have those things in place. You have to have ownership of those things, and they have to be cash flowing into the community and reinvesting into that community. And then lastly, was like making sure that the community leaders are behind that shared agenda, and that our community leaders are actually leaders that build and not just leaders that motivate. At a time, we did need leaders that were great oratory speakers, but we've kind of gotten stuck in that groove where we follow the person that says, great, smooth things, that has great oratorical capabilities and, can motivate you, but motivation only goes so far. Motivation just gets you to go out, be willing to go out into the streets and march, go out into the streets and protest, and go out into the streets and vote. But you're not building anything. We need leaders that are going out there with a vision for, here's how we're going to all come together and build. And despite what you want to say about John Smith and the Mormon community, his call to action was calling all those people from around the world saying, come here to Utah and we are going to build. I don't care. Don't put into the comments how that they weren't good people or anything. I get it. I saw the story. I know everything. The point that I'm making about that community is that John Smith put out a call to action that, had the oratory behind it, but it was like, come here and we are going to build. They built schools, they built houses, they built the infrastructure. And again, I know from earlier in the video, we weren't allowed to do that back when the Mormons didn't do it, but I'm saying right now, going forward, we need leaders who aren't just great speakers. We need leaders who don't just have a vision for what ought to happen. We need leaders that are actually going to help us build the things that are needed to take our community to the next level. So the final portion of this, because I'm getting really long, is that wealth is security, dignity, and freedom. And all that comes from when you have wealth, you have control of your time, you have the ability to protect your family, you have the ability to fund movements, like I said, buying the politicians, and you have the ability to actually shape the future for you, your family, and your entire culture when you actually have the wealth to do so. So we have to organize, build, circulate those dollars, and continue to create institutions. That's the end of my thoughts on chapter 2. Let me know in the comments your thoughts about what I had to say about chapter 2. There's a link to buy the book if you want to read it for yourself, and also join the community where we are actually going to be discussing not just where I want you all to not just be discussing what I said in the video, but actually discussing how to actually build these things in your own communities. See you in the next video.